Dear class, welcome to our final, the last project of this semester. As you know by now, the final project is about documentary, doing a documentary of your neighborhood. So we're going to look at a couple of photographers who documented their neighborhoods. First photographer will be Roy De Carava. Now, Roy De Carava lived in Harlem. He photographed there in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and really did an extensive document of that neighborhood. Now, Harlem has a long history and is a very well-known neighborhood. For years, it's been a center of Black culture here in America. In the 30s and 40s, the Harlem Renaissance was a time when musicians, poets, writers were all gathering there and applying their arts. In the 60s and 70s, it became known as something of a ghetto, about a burned out kind of place, as were a lot of city neighborhoods back in those times. It's kind of rebounded since then, but it's interesting seeing De Carava's take on Harlem, because a lot of people have cliche views and stereotypes about the neighborhood there. Now, De Carava lives in Harlem, so he has an insider's view. And I think this picture kind of sums up both the cliche and reality of Harlem. You see this empty lot here with a lot of garbage strewn about, some graffiti on the walls there. But at the same time, you see an ad in the upper right there for a new car. And you don't go advertising for new cars unless you think people can afford them. In the foreground, you see an effort to clean up the neighborhood here. You see a lot of the debris and trash has been collected into a pile there. And in the bottom right of the corner, you see something that doesn't exist anymore. It's a trash cart, basically a garbage can on two wheels. Now, this is what the sanitation workers used to push around to clean up the street. It had some, besides the garbage can there, it had some shovels, brooms, and they're about to sweep that up and pop it into the can there. Today, we have street cleaners, those big mechanized things that look like tanks that come down the street. So, this has been replaced and, it doesn't exist anymore. And the left-hand part of the picture, you see a girl going off to a prom, about to meet her date there, and you can see how she's very proud. She's holding up her dress, to make sure it doesn't drag on the street and get dirty at all there. Now, one of the things about documentary photography, you want to make a good photograph. You don't want to forget what we talked about composition, eliminating elements that aren't necessary to the photo, interesting perspectives. But it always has to come back to the subject. Documentary photography is content-driven. In a way, you have to forget some of the earlier stuff we talked about, where I was really emphasizing abstraction so that you would concentrate on composition in your pictures. This picture is a good example of a good documentary photo. It's a well-made photo. Structurally, look at all the rectangles in this picture. The rectangles of the billboard back here, the hand cart that the man is using to unload these Pepsi bottles onto. Still, no matter how much you look at the structure, you can't help but notice the details of the neighborhood here. The billboard, the ads, and mostly this man working really hard. Back then, pop bottles were glass, not plastic, really heavy. So you can see it literally kind of feel him straining to load up the cart here. Now, most of the picture in De Carava's documentary of Harlem are of close-up or medium view shots, but every now and then he'll go back to give you more of an overall picture of the neighborhood. Here we see a boulevard, and contrary to the idea of some ghetto, some burned out place, we see a really thriving neighborhood here. Lots of cars parked up and down the street, and this was at a time when not everyone owned a car like today. So it shows something about the affluence of the neighborhood here. And De Carava really liked jazz. He actually played saxophone, although never publicly. He only played to himself in his apartment. His photography, what he showed the world. But he did love jazz music. And here, this is a picture of a ballroom, with a concert going on and a couple of people who've been moved by the music, out dancing at these crazy angles that De Carava has captured. Here's a woman at a jazz club, and even without any captions, I think you get a good idea that this is a club because of the details. She's holding a drink in her hand. You can see a piano in the background, just enough to tell it's a piano. The cover and the music stand there. Pack of cigarettes on the counter. Interesting gesture with her hand up to her face there. Now, this is not a documentary photograph. I throw it in to show an example of what doesn't fit for this assignment. Nice picture. This is a picture of Percy Heath, I think, a jazz bassist. And very nice photo. What he's done is a silhouette, where the light is behind the subject to make the subject dark and stand out against a bright background. So this was shot in the studio. He puts up a gray backdrop, puts a single light blasting the backdrop from below and up at an angle. And then the bright background makes Heath stand out here in a silhouette. But, this picture could have been taken anywhere. Could have been in Harlem, could have been in San Diego, could have been in Berlin. So this really is not a documentary photograph. Documentary is about place, it's about information. Portraits can be a part of a documentary project. A lot of musicians made their home in Harlem. And this here is Thelonious Monk, one of the inventors of bebop, also a great pianist and composer. So it's interesting with the cigarette. Almost everyone at this point in time would have a cigarette dangling from their mouth here. Some other musicians on the left, Count Basie. Him and Duke Ellington kind of vied back and forth for the title of the best jazz band in the country. And I think what happened here, De Carava was getting ready to take a picture of Basie, and then Lena Horne, who was a singer in his band at the time, snuck up behind him and, give him a grab, to kind of give him a little surprise, and they're both laughing. Nice kind of a spontaneous moment here. You may remember this from earlier in the semester when we talked about depth of field. The organist Jimmy Smith. Now, as De Carava continued to work, word got out about his project and what he was working on. He gained some notoriety for this, and the writer Langston Hughes heard about De Carava's work. So they got together and decided to collaborate on a book project where De Carava would do the photographs and Hughes would do the text. This is the cover of the book, The Sweet Flypaper of Life. Now this is an interesting project because if you look at the disclaimer here, text of this book is entirely fictional. All names used are fictitious. Any relations to people living or dead is purely coincidental. The standard kind of disclaimer you have for a work of fiction. And that's what the text is. Rather than following De Carava around and trying to get accurate notes about who the people were and the places, he used the pictures as a motivation to create a work of fiction. So you have documentary photographs, true photographs, along with text that's made up. Another interesting thing about the book, a lot of books have lots of text and then a few photographs here and there to kind of illustrate some of the points. This is the opposite. This is really a photo book with a little bit of text. The photos are really the main focus of this book here. And this is a typical page in here. So you see just 3 lines of text here, sandwiched around the pictures of cars. Cars are a big deal in America, especially in the 50s. And again, a little bit of text. Young folks nowadays, I don't understand them. They get their hair all made up just to go and set and listen to a jukebox. It's very much Hughes' text is very much in the vernacular of the time, very much in the kind of slang usage of words. So as far as putting together your own projects. The order, the sequence of the pictures is very important. What picture will be first, which will grab people's attentions? How do the pictures flow from one to another? What's the final picture? Now, this is a good example here of contrast. The top left picture looks like winter or fall. You can see the woman is wearing a coat and the tree is bare, to her left. And then the bottom right is summer. Hot summer day, some kids opening up a fire hydrant here. So you see this contrast between summer and fall. Now, text is something you might want to consider in your final projects here too. And it's interesting how text can really steer how people perceive the work. For instance, previous picture here, you see the fire hydrant opened up and the text says, "Lord, help me just a little bit with that Rodney. He was always the first to turn on the hydrant on the street in the summer. Other boys see the water and want to get in it. Little girls looking, egg them on. And the boys just love it. Then the cops come and they have to grab their clothes quick." So this text really kind of sets up a mini story. This kid Rodney is a subject that pops up here and there in the book. And here the idea opens up the hydrant, other kids jumping in, girls watching, then trying to run. Looks like the kid on the top's been caught. Got a very serious look on his face while this hand is reaching in from the left side of the page there and holding on to the kid. Now the thing is, these pictures could have been taken totally at a different time. And judging from the background of the ones of the girls there, I bet they were. But the text ties these together into this narration of something that might never have happened. So this is the thing about text. You can use the text to steer how people perceive your work. Nice kind of father-son portrait here. A kid whispering in his dad's ear. I want to show all kinds of different aspects of the neighborhood. Here are some young kids dancing in a candy store, I think, on a corner. Now, even though the book is particularly about Harlem, it touches on broader issues. For instance, as courts decided on mixed schools, but the rush hour in the subway mixes everybody, white, black, Gentile, and Jew, closer than you ever are to your relatives. So here you can see, first a great picture. A woman, it looks kind of tired by the body language there down in the subway, but then tying it into the bigger issues of the civil rights movement. Now, when you're doing this project, it's a good idea to have your camera with you while you're going about, even if you're not particularly thinking of the project at a time. Here, what we see in this picture, De Carava is coming out of the subway one day. As he looks up, he sees this person waiting for the bus, and they look tired. They're kind of leaning forwards on their knees, supporting themselves on their knee there, their head and that cigarette silhouetted against the sky. The sky making a nice plain backdrop and a second frame within the frame. Really a great moment. Now, if he went home, grabbed his camera and came back, obviously the moment will be gone. This person would be on the bus and gone. But he always had a camera with him, so he was able to capture this. Other aspects of the neighborhood, a house party. So just neighbors and home folks. But they balls back and stomps down. Man, that is some old slang terms. But I still like the pictures. It's kind of nice people dancing here. And it's funny how they're in the kitchen. It seems like at some point or another, parties end up in the kitchen. Here's another comparison. One side of the two-page spread of the book, winter coal shoveled in. And then the next picture, summer ice coming. So again, the contrast, the idea of winter versus summer here. In this picture, the guy carrying the ice here in a bucket is a small part of the picture. You get to see what the rest of the neighborhood looks like. The idea that it's an urban neighborhood, like 4- and 5-story apartments, some cars out on the street. Now, why is this guy carrying a big block of ice? Well, documentary does tend to become a time capsule in a way, capturing the details of a particular moment. He's carrying a block of ice because he doesn't have a refrigerator. He has an ice box. And up until the 60s, these were actually fairly common. An ice box was an insulated wooden box that you would have a couple compartments. The top would have the block of ice, and then you'd put your groceries in the bottom. Anything you wanted to keep cold would be in the bottom part of that, and the ice would last for a few days since it was insulated. And then when it melted, you went to the ice house. Every neighborhood had an ice house. So you see here he's coming back with his block of ice. And of course today, this is all gone because everyone has refrigerators. Something else that's gone. This guy's winter coal shoveled in, what the caption says here. And nobody uses coal for heat anymore. Some power plants in places still use it, but it's such a dirty source of energy that everyone is doing either gas or electric heat these days. But back in the day here, coal was really dirty, very dusty, and it would kind of stick to you. So a lot of buildings had these trap doors out in the street. And the coal truck would pull up, and then the worker would shovel coal into the basement, so he wouldn't have to go through the house and dirty up the house or building there. You can see it's hard work. You can see the shovel in the guy's hand and how the coal dust has dirtied his clothing. Looks kind of maybe winter coal, but he's shoveling it in toward the end of summer here, and looks kind of hot and sweaty. Top left corner, for those who don't recognize it, this is a barber pole. This is a symbol that's been used since medieval ages. It used to symbolize a place where you could either get your hair cut or your teeth pulled. So barbers and dentists often did the same thing back then. So now you don't see these much anymore because all the hair places have become hair cutlery and fashion salons and such. So, in a few years, nobody might recognize what that pole symbolizes. Picket lines, picketing, striking for better conditions, better pay. And at night, the street meetings on the corner, talking about buy black. So at De Carava's work, we see a combination of composition and moment, but it always comes back to the subject. So remember, with documentary, no matter how well the picture is made, it's about the subject, about the content. So I hope you liked De Carava here. Next photographer we'll look at is the photographer Bill Owens.